In 1986, an eye surgeon named Richard Schulze knelt in the mud of a 400-acre plantation in Hardeeville, South Carolina, and pressed rice seed into wet earth. 14 pounds. That was everything. All that remained of a grain that had once made Charleston one of the wealthiest cities in the Western Hemisphere. For 200 years, it dominated American rice production. Planters called their fields gold mines. Then, it disappeared. For 60 years, the last surviving seed sat in a government vault in Texas, and nobody came for it. We went through USDA seed bank records, academic research on the colonial rice trade, South Carolina agricultural histories, and plantation-era documentation going back to the 1680s. Sources are in the description. What the documented record shows is not just a story about rice. It's a story about who knew how to grow it, and who took the credit. The answer was on the other side of the Atlantic. For thousands of years before Carolina gold existed, farmers along the coast of West Africa, from Senegal through Sierra Leone, the region slave traders would call the Rice Coast, had cultivated Oryza glaberrima in tidal floodplains and mangrove swamps. Picture the technique. A woman walks barefoot between rows, dropping seed into holes pressed by her toes, tamping each one down with her heel. Nearby, men carve mortars from hardwood trunks. Others weave winnowing baskets from bulrush and sweetgrass. The water systems, when to flood, when to drain, how to read the tide, had been refined over generations. This was not primitive agriculture. It was the most sophisticated rice system in the world, and when slave ships crossed the Atlantic, they carried that knowledge in the people chained below deck. The planters waiting on the other side had no idea how to grow rice. They were about to find out they needed people who did. Rice seed arrived in the Carolina colony in the 1680s. The traditional story credits a storm-damaged ship from Madagascar, though historians debate the origin. What nobody debates is what happened next. English colonists planted it and failed. They had no experience with wetland cultivation. But the West Africans they enslaved did. Within a generation, South Carolina planters were paying premium prices to slave traders for captives specifically from the Rice Coast, people whose ancestors had been growing rice for centuries. By the 1720s, a planter named John Stewart was boasting about his experimental rice plots along the Cooper River. Carolina gold had become the colony's largest export, 6 million pounds shipped to England every year. British merchants declared it the finest grain in the world. But it was not English planters who made it grow. Every step, from the dike engineering to the tidal water management to the seed-to-table processing, came from African knowledge. Stand at the edge of a low-country rice field in 1850 and look out. Embankments 6 feet tall and 15 feet wide stretch along the riverbank, hand-built from swamp mud. Canals run between impounded fields, controlled by wooden trunks, hollowed logs fitted into the dikes that opened and closed with the tide. Twice a day, the moon pulls 9-foot tides up the Savannah and Cooper rivers, pushing fresh water through the trunks and flooding the fields. The entire system, 780 miles of canals, tens of thousands of acres of cleared swampland, was designed, built, and maintained by enslaved Africans. Historians have calculated that these earthworks moved more soil than the construction of the pyramids at Giza. The wealth was staggering. By the mid-1800s, over 75,000 acres of low-country land produced 160 million pounds of rice annually. At the start of the Civil War, Carolina gold accounted for 3.5 million of the 5 million bushels of American rice. 70% of national production, one single variety. Planters ran profit margins as high as 26%. Charleston became the wealthiest city south of Philadelphia and the hub of the colonial Atlantic trade. Roughly 40% of all enslaved Africans brought to mainland North America passed through Charleston Harbor. Some plantation owners referred to their rice fields as gold mines. They were not exaggerating, but every grain of that gold was grown with stolen knowledge and forced labor. The system could not survive the end of the labor it was built on. After the Civil War, planters who had never touched a rice field faced a new reality, paying for work that enslaved people had done at no cost. Heavy mechanical harvesters transforming rice production in Louisiana and Texas were useless in low-country marshland. The soil was too soft, the machines sank, then the hurricanes came. Between 1893 and 1911, Storm after storm tore through the Carolina coast. Picture the aftermath. Dike walls breached and crumbling into brown water, salt flooding fields that needed fresh, 4-foot rice stalks flattened into muck, the wooden trunks ripped from embankments and carried downstream. Each hurricane destroyed years of engineering. The labor force that had maintained the system for 2 centuries was gone. The knowledge to rebuild it was still there, held by Gullah Geechee communities, the descendants of the enslaved Africans who had always grown the rice. Nobody asked them. Gulf Coast producers filled the vacuum. Mechanized, operating on flat, dry prairie, they grew modern varieties bred for machine harvesting, long shelf life, and uniform appearance, not flavor. South Carolina's rice production collapsed. The last commercial crop of Carolina Gold was harvested in 1927. After that, the grain existed in only 2 places: in the small private gardens of Gullah Geechee families who never stopped growing it, and in a USDA seed vault at the Rice Research Laboratory in Beaumont, Texas. Cold storage, catalogued and forgotten. For 60 years, nobody opened the file. He wanted heritage rice to plant at his. He wanted heritage rice to plant at his Turnbridge plantation, not to eat, but to attract waterfowl. His search led him to Charles Bollock, a plant geneticist at the USDA in Beaumont, who found Carolina Gold seed still preserved in the collection. After 2 years of preparation, Bollock shipped 14 pounds to South Carolina. Schulze planted 12 acres in 1986. First harvest, 64 pounds. By 1988, 10,000 pounds, the first large-scale Carolina Gold harvest in 60 years. He donated the rice to the Savannah Association for the Blind, a New York Times feature that December put the revival on the national map. In 1998, Glenn Roberts founded Anson Mills in Columbia, South Carolina, and began selling Carolina Gold commercially, the first to offer it to the public in nearly a century. Then a chef from rural Virginia changed everything. Sean Brock had grown up poor, eating from his grandmother's garden. The first time he tasted Hoppin' John made with commodity rice, it was bland and forgettable. The first time he cooked it with Carolina Gold and Sea Island red peas, he said something clicked, the moment that explained why he became a chef. In 2010, he opened Husk in Charleston, a restaurant built entirely on Southern heritage ingredients. Bon Appetit named it Best New Restaurant in America in 2011. His cookbook Heritage, a New York Times bestseller, a James Beard Award winner, featured Carolina Gold not as a novelty, but as the foundation of a lost culinary world. The Carolina Rice Kitchen, where rice, field peas, benny seed, and heirloom corn once formed a complete system. Most of it had vanished alongside the grain. Today, the number of farmers growing Carolina Gold in South Carolina can be counted on 2 hands. One of them is Marion Rollin Chalmers. He plants it at Turnbridge, the same plantation where Schulze brought the grain back. Chalmers' great-grandparents, Maria and William, began growing rice on 4 acres near Bluffton after they were freed from enslavement. Agricultural records confirm they may have grown Carolina Gold itself. Now Rollin walks the same mud, planting the same grain. By choice, on his own terms, under his own name. But the revival is precarious. Carolina Gold is a tall, fragile plant, prone to lodging, vulnerable to birds and disease. It is expensive to grow, difficult to harvest, and produced in tiny volumes. Most rice sold under the Carolina brand in American grocery stores has no genetic connection to the original grain. The Carolina Gold Rice Foundation works to preserve not just the rice, but the full system of crops around it. Benny, field peas, Sea Island red peas, heirloom corn. The seed was saved. The system around it was not. For 200 years, enslaved West Africans engineered the most profitable grain system in North America. Their expertise, the water management, the dike construction, the planting techniques, the processing knowledge, made Charleston one of the richest cities in the hemisphere. The planters who profited never credited where that knowledge came from. When their free labor ended, they walked away from the grain rather than learn to grow it themselves. The Gulf Coast industry replaced it with cheaper varieties and machines. An entire cuisine disappeared from the tables it once defined. The seed was in a government vault in Beaumont, Texas, the entire time, For 60 years, nobody opened it. Right now, there are heritage grains sitting in USDA seed banks that haven't been planted in a century. Varieties that once fed entire regions, catalogued and stored and collecting dust. We're already pulling those records. Subscribe so you don't miss what we find. Thanks for watching.